It happened as I left my horse in front of the saloon and stepped in for a last look around. It was after 10 o'clock and getting late for the town of Mora. And I went into the saloon and stepped into trouble. Two men faced each other across the room, and all the rest were flattened against the walls. Chico Cruz, deadly as a sidewinder, stood posed and negligent, a slight smile on his lips. His dark eyes flat and without expression. And facing him was Tom Sunday. Big, blonde, and powerful. Unshaven, as always these days. Heavier than he used to be, but looking as solid and formidable as a blockhouse. Neither of them saw me. Their attention was concentrated on each other, and death hung in the air like the smell of lightning on a rocky hillside. As I stepped in, they drew, and with my own eyes I saw it. I saw Chico's hand flash. I had never believed a man could draw so fast. His gun came up, and then he jerked queerly, and his body snapped sideways, and his gun went off into the floor. And Tom Sunday was walking. Tom Sunday was walking in, gun poised. And Chico was trying to get his gun up, and Tom stopped and spread his legs, and grimly, brutally, he fired a shot into Chico's body. And then coolly, another shot. Chico's gun dropped. It hit the floor with a thud. And Chico turned, and in turning, his eyes met mine across the room. And he said very, very distinctly, into the silence that followed the thundering of the guns, "It was not you." He fell then, fell all in a piece, and his hat rolled free, and he lay on the floor, and he was dead. Tom Sunday turned and stared at me, and his eyes were blazing with a hot, hard flame. "You want me?" he said. And the words were almost a challenge. "It was a fair shooting, Tom," I said quietly. "I do not want you." He pushed by me and went out of the door, and the room broke into wild talk. Never would have believed it. Fastest thing I ever saw. But Chico, the voice was filled with astonishment. He killed Chico Cruz. Until that moment, I had always believed that if it came to a difficulty, that Orrin could take care of Tom Sunday. But I no longer believed it. More than any of them, I knew the stuff of which Orrin was made. He had a kind of nerve rarely seen, but he was no match for Tom when it came to speed. And there was a fatal weakness against him, for Orrin truly liked Tom Sunday. And Tom? Somehow I don't think there was any feeling left in Tom, not for anyone, unless it was me. The easy camaraderie, the comradeship was gone. Tom was ingrown, bitter, and hard as nails. When Chico's body was moved out, I tried to find out what started the trouble, but it was like so many barroom fights, and it just sort of happened. Two tough, edgy men, and neither about to take any pushing around. And maybe it was a word, maybe a spilled drink, a push, or a brush against each other, and then guns were out, and they were shooting. Tom had ridden out of town. Cap was sitting in the jailhouse with Babcock and Shay when I walked in, and I could see Fedderson through the open door, so I walked back to the cells. That right? What they're saying? Tom Sunday killed Chico Cruz? He beat him to the draw? Fedderson shook his head unbelievingly. I never would have believed it. I thought Chico was the fastest thing around. Unless it was you. Fedderson grinned suddenly. How about you and Tom? You two still friends? It made me mad, and I turned sharply around, and he stepped back from the bars. But he was grinning when he moved back. Well, I just asked, he said. Some folks never bought that story about you backing Cruz down. Tom is my friend, I told him. We'll always be friends. Maybe, he said. Maybe. He walked back to the bars. Looks like I ain't the only one who has troubles. Outside in the dark, I told Cap about it, every detail. He listened and nodded thoughtfully. Tyrel, Cap said, we've been friends, and trail dust is thicker than blood. But you watch Tom Sunday. You watch him. That man's gone loco like an old buffalo bull who's left the herd. Cap took his pipe out of his mouth and knocked out the ashes against the awning post. Tyrel, marked my words. He started now, and nothing's going to stop him. Orrin will be next, and then you. That night I got in the saddle and rolled all the way out to the ranch to sleep, pausing only a moment at the gap where the river flowed through, remembering Juan Torres who died there. It was a bloody country, and time it was quieted down. Inside me, I didn't want to admit that Cap was right, but I was afraid. I was very much afraid. As if the shooting, which had nothing to do with Pritz, Alvarado, or myself, had triggered the whole situation from Santa Fe to Cimarron. The lid suddenly blew off. Maybe it was the Pritz was shrewd enough to see his own position weakening, and if anything was to be done, it had to be done now. Jonathan and Laura, they moved back up to Mora, and it looked like they had come to stay. Things were shaping up for a trial of Wilson and Fedderson for the murder of Juan Torres. We moved Fedderson to a room in an old adobe up the street that had been built for a fort. We moved him by night, and the next morning we stuck a dummy up the window of the jail. We put that dummy up just before daylight, and then Cap, Orrin, and me, we took to the hills where we knew we ought to be. We heard the shots down from the slope from us, and we went down riding fast. They were wearing Sharp's buffalo guns. They both fired, and when we heard those two rifles talk, we came down out of the higher trees and had them boxed. The Sharp's buffalo rifles was a good rifle, but it was a single shot, and we had both of them covered with Winchesters before they could get to their horses or had time to load. Baisano and Dwyer caught flat-footed and red-handed, and nothing to show for it but a couple of bullets through a dummy. That was what broke Jonathan Pritz's back. We had 4 of the 7 men now, and with a matter of hours, after we tied up 2 more, the 7th man wasn't going to cause anybody any harm. Seems he got drunk one night. On the way home, something scared his horse. He got bucked off, and with a foot caught in the stirrup, there wasn't much he could do. Somewhere along the line, he'd lost his pistol and couldn't kill the horse. He was found tangled in some brush, his foot still in the stirrup, and the only way they knew him was by his boots, which were new, and his saddle and his horse. A man dragged like that is no pretty sight. And he'd been dead for 10 to 12 hours. Ollie came down to the sheriff's office with Bill Sexton and Vincent Romero. They were getting up political rally, and Orrin was going to speak. Several of the high mucky mucks from Santa Fe were coming up, but this was to be Orrin's big day. It was a good time to put himself forward, and the stage was being set. And there was to be real old-time fandango with the folks coming in back at the folks from the creeks, and everybody was to be there, and all dressed in their Sunday go-to-meeting clothes. In preparation for it, I made the rounds and gave several of the troublemakers their walking papers. What I mean is, I told them they would enjoy Las Vegas or Sirocco or Cimarron a whole sight better, and why didn't they start now? They started. "Have you heard the talk that's going around?" Shay asked. "What talk?" "It's being said that Tom Sunday is coming into town after Orrin." "Tom Sunday and Orrin are friends," I said. "I know Tom's changed, but I don't believe he'll go that far." "Put no faith in that line of thought, Tyrel. Believe me, that man hasn't a friend left. He sure is a grizzly with a sore tooth, and nobody goes near him anymore. The man's changed, and he works with a gun nearly every day. Folks coming by there say they can hear it almost any hour. Tom never thought much of Orrin as a fighter, and Tom never knew Orrin like I did." "That isn't all." Shay put a cigar down on the edge of the desk. "There's talk about what would happen if you and Tom should meet." Well, I was mad, and I got up and walked across the office and swore. Yes, and I wasn't a swearing man. Oddly enough, thinking back, I can remember many gunfighters who were. Most of them I knew were sparring in the use of words as well as whiskey. But one thing I knew, Orrin must not meet Tom Sunday. Even if Orrin beat him, Orrin would lose. A few years ago, it would not have mattered if he'd been in a gun battle, but now it would wreck his career. If Orrin could get out of town, but he couldn't. He had been selected as the speaker for this big political rally, and that would be just about the time when Tom Sunday would be in town. "Thanks," I said to Shay. "Thanks for telling me." Leaving Cap in charge of the office, I mounted up and rode out to the ranch, and Orrin was there, and we sat down and had dinner with Ma. It was good to have our feet under the same table again, and Ma brightened up and talked like her old self. Next day was Sunday, when Orrin and me decided to take Ma to church. It was a lazy morning with bright sunshine, and Orrin took Ma on the buckboard, and we boys rode along behind. We wore our broadcloth suits, and the four of us, dressed in black, made a sight walking around Ma, who was a mighty little woman among her four tall sons. And Drew was with us, standing there with Ma and me, and I was a proud man. It was a meeting I'll not soon forget. That was one because when Ollie heard the family was going, he came along and stood with us, hymn singing and the preaching. Whether or not Orrin had heard any of the stories going around about Tom, I felt it necessary to warn him. If I expected him to brush it off, I was wrong. He was dead serious about it when I explained. "But I can't leave," he added. "Everybody would know why I went, and they would have thought I was afraid, and I'd lose as many votes as if I actually fought him." He was right, of course. So we prepared for the meeting with no happy anticipation of it, although this was to be Orrin's big day and his biggest speech, and the one that would have fairly launched him in politics. Men were coming up from Santa Fe to hear him, all the crowd around the Capitol who pulled the political strings. Everybody knew Orrin was to speak, and everybody knew Tom would be there, and nothing any of us could do about it but wait. Jonathan Pritz knew he'd been left out, and he knew it was no accident. He also knew it was to be Orrin's big day, and that Laura's cutting loose had not hurt him one bit. Also, Jonathan knew the trial was due to come off soon, and before the attorney got through cross-examining Wilson and some of the others, the whole story of his move into the territory would be revealed. There was small chance it could be stopped, but if something were to happen to Orrin and me, if there was to be a jail delivery, he wouldn't dare. Or would he?